Hi and welcome to this week's Life Lessons video. It's great to be back with you all. Do you sometimes experience a sense of inner conflict and turmoil and tension? Perhaps when you try to think, act and live as your authentic best, it's almost like there's a part of you which is pulling against and fighting against these good intentions. Well, in this week's video, we're going to be talking about the inner child's inner battle and why it is your inner child is almost fighting against your adult self and your true spiritual nature. And most importantly, we'll be offering some practical tips and advice as to how you can end this battle and restore inner peace and harmony. Okay, David, so this inner battle, this inner turmoil, I know from everyone, all our clients and everyone we work with in our Facebook community and everyone who writes to us, they describe it as basically lots of uncomfortable and painful red light feelings. So the battle manifests as it could be anxiety, it could be panic, it could be depression, it could be anger, it could be frustration, it could be hopelessness, guilt, all sorts. So we know that something is not right here. Something is going on inside us. David, what is actually happening?
Okay, so if this is you, if you're suffering or experiencing that inner turmoil that Alex is talking about, this is the label that we call the inner child. So let's just define for our new viewers what we mean by the label inner child. And it's an analogy. It's an analogy for a part of your mind. So remember, you're not schizophrenic. It's not something that's outside of you. You're not going mad, but it's a part of your mind that it's almost like stuck. I love the definition the Chinese say, like a kernel in the middle of the nut. It's tight. And that part of your mind got stuck, in my experience, normally around the age of 6 to 9 years old, around that time, not exactly, but around that time. And this is important because this is a time when a sensitive child, like you, a sensitive child has developed their emotional feelings in advance of their cognitive reasoning or understanding. So what I mean by this is they are creating red light feelings that we call them. They could call them anxiety, worry, stress, tension, fear, whatever you want to call it. There's so many names. That's why I prefer the term red light, because it gives an umbrella term on that. And they've developed these red lights, but they don't understand why and how they've developed them.
Okay, so the inner child, which is part of our mind, is creating the red light emotional feelings and this sense of inner turmoil and conflict. And so why does the inner child do that?
So the inner child is doing that because they're embracing, encountering, going through, whatever word you want to do, what we call a life lesson, a very challenging, difficult situation, far ahead of what the inner child, what the little child, the 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old can cognitively understand and rationalize and deal with. Now, that could be lots of things. That could be something as serious that I deal with my clients, abuse. That could be sexual, emotional, physical abuse. It could be disruption in their home life. It could be a moving school. It could be bullying. There's not one that's worse or better than the other. So a child goes through this situation where things are not the way the child wants them to be.
So what you're saying is there's a part of our mind that is, I guess, in a sense, resisting reality.
Exactly.
It's resisting reality. And of course, at the moment, when we're producing this video now, we're in the middle of this global coronavirus pandemic. And this is totally creating lots of inner turmoil and conflict for the inner child. And we talked about that a couple of videos ago. And if you're really struggling with that issue, David has also produced a guided meditation last week to help you with that. But so the inner child resists reality.
Doesn't know how to deal with it. It hasn't got the knowledge. It hasn't got the education to deal with what's happening. So something has happened to it or around it, something it doesn't like or it can't understand. And you'll know if this has happened because you'll hear yourself using words like, it's not fair, it's unjust, it's not the way it should be. And when you hear yourself saying words like it's not fair, that's your inner child talking. And he or she is saying, it's not the way I want it to be. That's what it's not fair means.
I mean, I think, David, a lot of people will kind of be sitting at home thinking, okay, so I understand the idea of the inner child. It's this young, juvenile, immature part of my mind that has become stuck. And we always say, it's normally becomes stuck at the ages of 6, 7, 8, 9 years old.
Around that time.
Around that time age. So pretty young. How can it possibly be that if I am trying my level best, the adult part of me and my kind of spiritual nature, my Shen that you always talk about, David, and you say this is divine, it has all the knowledge, it has all the wisdom, this is our, I guess, powerful guiding force. How can it possibly be that even when we're trying really hard to be authentic and think correctly and do the right thing, how can it be that this small part of our mind, this small tiny child can be so powerful and that it can overrule almost? It seems like it's overruling the adult part of us, the more sensible, logical, experienced part of us. And it seems like it's overruling the Shen.
Okay, so let's explain this. So we have to go baby steps now, because part of the armory that the child does is create confusion. The child loves to confuse you. The child part of your mind loves to put you on the carousel of despair, self-fulfilling prophecy. So you've got to slow down. This is where meditation, or what I think meditation is, focusing your mind really helps. So first of all, what happens is, remember the child has encountered a situation that it doesn't understand. It can't work out. It doesn't think it's fair or it's just, and it gets stuck. Now, why it gets so powerful, and this is why the analogy of the inner child can work, because it's almost like if you think you had a physical child and you kept letting that physical child have its own way. So if you said bedtime was 9 o'clock and 9 o'clock, the child wouldn't go to bed or cries and shouts, and you say, oh, okay, stop up another hour, stop up little bit later. So you're not giving it what I would call compassionate discipline. Now, I like to make that difference because I know a lot of my clients have been overly disciplined and they don't like the word discipline. But if you had a physical child and you would let that child run riot, run the house, take over, and then you think the child is going to listen to you, and this is one of the reasons, because you haven't been listening or compassionately disciplining that part of your mind. And so that part of your mind slowly, not suddenly, it didn't happen overnight, slowly, day by day, week by week, month by month, and year by year has grown more and more and more powerful. So that's the first little step.
I just want to pick you up on that, David. So I know, well, first off, a lot of people say, oh, I don't like the word discipline. I don't think it's appropriate to discipline a child. When I was young, I was overly disciplined and it didn't help me at all. But with the compassionate self-discipline is more about setting ground rules and sticking to them, and explaining to the child that these are the ground rules and keeping them in place. Now, before we go on, I can see what you're saying, that if the adult part of our mind, the adult us, that is supposed to be guiding the inner child, if we constantly let it get its own way, then the inner child becomes more powerful.
Yes.
Okay. But it still doesn't kind of answer the question of how the inner child can be more powerful than the Shen. Or am I right in thinking that the inner child is more powerful than the Shen?
No, the inner child is not more powerful than the Shen, but you jumped a couple ahead. Before we get on to the Shen, so the first step is you've got to give that compassionate guidelines, discipline, whatever you want to call it, criteria, and you've got to maintain that. The second thing that what happens is when you don't do that, then as Alex says, the child gets more and more and more powerful, shouts louder and louder and louder, just like a naughty child, just like a spoiled child. We call it squealing piglets. The child will have temper tantrums. And if you give in to it, then it just gets more powerful and more powerful. I heard an analogy. If you give in to a child, it's like throwing red meat to a tiger. It gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And if you've been giving in to your inner child, the inner child will get stronger and stronger and stronger. Secondly, what then happens, instead of seeing this part of your mind as an inner child who's struggling, you see it as some kind of a monster.
Or a problem.
Or a big problem. And you try and shut it out. And you don't listen to it. And you don't acknowledge it. And it just drives you mad. And even one of my clients yesterday said these words, "I hate it. I hate her. She is just a monster. She is destroying my life." And then this is the inner conflict that Alex started the video in. Now, Alex's question, let's move on to Alex's question. Why is the inner child seemingly more stronger than the Shen, that spiritual nature of you? So the Shen will not step forward. The Shen is your inner knowing, your inner knowledge. It's like a reference library that's waiting there. And I always say on these videos, and I really couldn't mean it more strongly from this teaching, you are awesome. You have everything you need. It's there waiting for you, that inner knowing, that inner strength. But you get so distracted by this wailing and noise and squealing piglets, you don't go and visit the library of wisdom. You don't go inside of yourself and find that true knowing that can deal with this child, because this is not a monster. This is a little child. I've been doing this for nearly 45 years now, well over 40 years, and I've dealt with thousands and thousands of clients. I can tell you, I have never once found a monster. What I have found is a little child, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, in a corner, scared stiff, absolutely terrified. And the job is to go and help that part of your mind that I'm calling a child. He badly, desperately needs help.
So I guess I kind of visualize this as the inner child wants to resist reality. It won't accept reality.
Because it can't control it.
Okay, so it kicks up a complete force, creates lots of red light feelings within you, creates this sense of inner turmoil, conflict and battle. One of its other tactics is it creates confusion. Yes. It confuses your thinking. Yes. And often we just rush to focus on the inner child to try and get rid of the red light feelings and placate the inner child. Yes. and please the inner child. And just our top priority often is just, I just want to get rid of these red light feelings. So it almost makes you focus on the wrong thing. And what you're saying is, yes, we need to pay attention to the inner child. Yes, we need to listen to what the inner child's grievances are. Yes, we need to put in place some compassionate boundaries. But at the same time, the adult us, the adult part of our mind, needs to take the time to touch base, if you like, with the reference library of wisdom that is our inner spiritual nature, because we can't expect the Shen to just step up and solve all the problems.
The Shen will not step up and solve
We have to go to the Shen
to gain the knowledge, and then we have to do it. So this is why the analogy of the inner child really works well. As Alex has just explained perfectly, imagine you had a child and every 5 minutes it was crying for a chocolate biscuit. And every time it cried and played up and had a temper tantrum and a squealing piglet, you think, oh my goodness, I've had enough. I'll give them a biscuit. And then over a year, 2 years, suddenly the child becomes fat and obese. Then the child blames you. And the inner child part of your mind is exactly like that. It just screams and shouts. And if you keep on giving into it, then it gets more and more out of control. Then the inner child blames you. And this is when you'll hear, we've done loads of videos on it. This is when you start saying things like, You're not good enough. You can't cope. You're unlovable. You can't control nothing. Everything's too much for you. You might as well pack in now. This is your inner child screaming and shouting. Now, as Alex says, don't think the Shen is going to come like a knight on a white steed in armor to defend the inner child. The Shen is just your inner knowing, your inner knowledge. You've got to go and access that for when you're educating the child, because this child is not a monster. It's a child that badly needs spiritual and emotional education. And that's your role as the adult. And I think we've done a video on this.
Yeah, we have. I was going to say, we've done a video specifically on what happens when you haven't got the answers to give to your inner child. So if you listen to your inner child, the inner child says, I'm really concerned about this issue. This is a big problem. And as the adult parent, you need to educate the child, teach her the life lesson. But if you haven't got the answers, where do you get them from? And so we did a video teaching on that, and I will put a link to it above. And that is about going to the Shen, going to that inner reference library of wisdom to find the answers, to find these universal truths that the inner child keeps rejecting, such as, you know, we do live in a world of unpredictability and uncertainty. We can't control external circumstances. Sometimes people will let us down, but it doesn't mean that all people are bad. Just simple universal truths that the inner child finds so difficult to accept, because the inner child is always wanting a utopian world. It always wants things its way. So David, everything you've just said there about it's up to the adult us to make contact, to tap into, to connect to go to that inner Shen reference library, that really resonates, because that what we're talking about here is self-responsibility.
Absolutely.
The Shen, as you said, is not going to come flying in and sort everything out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's almost like, and we've explained this before, the adult part of our mind has to be the kind of touch point between the Shen and our inner child. And then I guess the teaching is, in terms of the rebalancing, is it kind of like when we bring the two back in balance, so our human-centered mind, which is the adult part of our mind, and our inner child, once they're harmoniously balanced with the Shen, rather than pushing the Shen away, is that when we are at our authentic best?
So that's what I would call the oneness. And I remember the teaching, the fundamental teaching, and I said this a couple of videos ago, it's a reading from the Tao Te Ching, to build yourself, to build who you are on rock. Don't build it on shifting sand, because if you build it on your emotional feelings, you're building your life, who you are, what you represent on shifting sand. It's much better to build it on the rock of this spirituality, of this inner knowing. And so one of the things the child is doing is creating a separation. And you see it as you walk around the streets. If you've seen a child on those guide rails pulling away, and that's what your child is doing. It's lost trust in everything. It's definitely lost trust in you, because as Alex says, it wants certainty. And we have to accept, here comes a big life lesson. We live in a universe of uncertainty. The inner child hates that concept. It wants to know, and it wants to be in control. And so these are very vital life lessons that you have to teach it. Now, there's two basic things I talk about on each video. I know I'm going to drive you mad, but I've got to keep on saying it. The biggest misunderstanding that the child has, the number one, please listen to me. Every client, nearly every client, I can't say every client, nearly every client I speak to, we end up here. This is where we end up. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim of them. Now, I know the adult you listening to this will nod your head and go, well, of course I create my emotions. Of course I do. Emotions don't float around like a virus and attack me. But I can tell you, if you're honest, now here comes the second one I want to talk about. Truth, honesty, and integrity. Don't speak to anybody else. After this video, sit quietly and say, does every part of my mind, my thinking, my psyche, whatever you want to call it, every part, not 99.9%, I'm talking about 100%. 100%. Does 100% of my psyche believe that I create the emotional feelings? And I will almost guarantee, if you're honest, there's a little part of you, and that's the one I would call the inner child. They think they're a victim. And that's when you talk about protection. I have to be safe. I have to be secure. I have to build these walls. I can't trust anybody. This is your inner child. If you didn't know what the inner child was, this is your inner child. Just one last thing. When you want to know when your inner child is talking is when you use this statement. I feel like I can't cope, David. I feel like this is too much for me. I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like I'm unlovable. I feel like this. I feel like that. This is your inner child. She's giving you feelings. And what you've got to replace it with is I think, I believe, I choose. And that then focuses on your inner child and your education.
And for a lot of people, David, if they're trying to do their level best, trying to be authentic, as we said at the top of the video, and it's almost like the inner child is creating doubts. I want to do it this way. I want to try and approach a difficult situation this way. I want to try and keep calm. But the inner child will always be saying, but it's going to be a problem. But this is a disaster. But this is out of our control. And it's always giving you the doubts. And so
worst case scenario.
How do we deal with those doubts?
So we go and visit the bank of spiritual knowledge. And we learn ourselves. So in the reparenting videos, we say 3 steps. First step, you have to get yourself in order.
When you say you mean the adult part of your mind?
You. Yeah. Because if you're addressing the child, and this is again what I find in the majority of my clients, secretly, somewhere in your mind, you kind of agree with them. When they say, oh, well, life's really bad. Oh, well, I'm a victim. Oh, well, people treat me like...
Or it's going to turn out a disaster.
You kind of go, well, they got a point. Yeah. And then you've lost it because the child goes, oh, so I'm in control, am I? And it's like putting an 8-year-old at the driving seat. And this is the truth. Emotionally, I don't care how successful you are in your career, emotionally, you may have an 8-year-old driving your car. And that's the truth. And so you've got to be able to answer these questions. And when I work with my clients, this is what I'm doing. Because I can't change them. That's not my job as a Taoist. My job is to give the education. So I will always answer the questions. Now, this is what the adult part of you has got to learn to do to your inner child. Answer its questions. If you can't answer its questions, we have a Facebook community. You can write in the Facebook community. Everyone will help you. You can put on the bottom of this YouTube video. We'll answer your questions. But you have to answer the child's questions. That's the first thing. You have to get yourself in a position to be able to answer.
So to get ourselves in a position to give a truthful, authentic, honest, clear, spiritually informed answer, the adult part of us has to connect to Shen. It has to go to that reference library. David, what are the quickest and most successful ways to connect with the Shen, to get that knowledge, that wisdom?
Okay. Number 1, do not lie. And you say, well, I'm not a liar. I can tell you, do not lie. Everything that goes through your inner voice, that inner yap, it has to be the truth. And by that I mean, when you say lies like, I'm not good enough, I can't cope, I'm unlovable, the world's too much for me, everyone's against me, I'm a victim, everyone hates me, then you have to give yourself the evidence, the core, the reason, not the result of thinking you're not good enough. This is where all of my clients go, oh, well, I'm unlovable because my boyfriend just left me. No, that's the result of thinking you're unlovable. That's not the core, the base, the core, the seed. You've got to go to what I call the evidence. Give me the evidence where you got that thought, that belief from, because I can tell you, you didn't come down the birth canal believing you were unlovable. You did not come down the birth canal believing you couldn't cope, because you wouldn't have come down the birth canal. You did not come down the birth canal believing you're not good enough. This is learned behavior. Go back and find out where you learned it from.
David, I want to stop you there because I guess I'm a little bit confused. most people would be asking, so what do I need to do to connect to my Shen inner wisdom? I think they can, we can all grasp why it's important to do this, but you've just said, well, just don't lie.
Don't lie.
So what you're actually saying is it's not about doing something,
No.
It's about stopping doing something.
That's the Taoist teaching. The Taoist teaching is not what you do, it's what you stop doing. Because the Taoist teaching is you are already awesome. You are already divine. That is your birthright. You don't have to go and earn that. You don't have to go and get that off somebody. You don't need that validation and approval from the external world. You are already it. You're running around trying to get what you've already got. And that's exactly what Alex said. It's not what you do, it's what you stop doing. Stop lying. Stop it. So that's when, people laugh when I say that, but I couldn't say it with more sincerity. Stop it. When you're digging a hole, and I'm going, well, why are you digging the hole? And you go, well, I don't know. At least put the spade down and stop digging the hole. And this is what this is what my clients say to me every day. I say, well, why do you do it? And they go, I don't know. I go, you're doing something and you don't know why you're doing it. Well, I don't know. There's a client, my last client like last night. Well, it's a habit. Well, that's not an excuse. Why are you doing it? I don't know why I'm doing it. I've been doing it a long time. I know you've been doing it a long time, but why are you doing it? I don't know. She said, you tell me. I thought, no wonder I've got no hair. How can I tell you what you've been doing for 40 years? You know why you've been doing it. And I told her, and she said, oh, you're right. I always knew that. Ugh. If you always knew it, why do you keep doing it? You've got to stop it.
So, David, are you saying that even if I know we say, one good way to connect to your Shen and communicate with your Shen is through meditation and things like that, sitting quietly, calming your mind down, not letting the inner child's negative self-talk become your truth, sitting quietly to connect to your Shen. But I guess if we then, after we've done the quiet meditation, if we continue to lie to ourselves, So if we continue to think along the lines of, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I can't manage, essentially buying into what the inner child's saying to us, that then almost cuts off the supply line of spiritual knowledge within us. So I guess it's a 24/7 thing in terms of keeping the flow of oxygen between us and our Shen, this line of communication open, because although we can turn it on when we do a quiet meditation and we can feel great for 10 minutes or half an hour afterwards or a few hours afterwards, have that sense of kind of inner peace and enlightenment, as soon as we start lying to ourselves again in the way that you've said that many of your clients do, and I know I do, and I'm sure many of you at home do, and if you can recognize this, please do comment below. But as soon as we start lying to ourselves, that turns off the oxygen supply, that turns off the line of communication, that turns off the supply of inner peace, wisdom, inspiration, creativity, flexibility, all these spiritual things that we as the adult need to be able to communicate to the child.
Well, if you use the analogy of the reference library, you sit quietly, you focus, you go to your reference library, you read a book. The book tells you, do not lie. Honor yourself and your honesty and your integrity. You read that book, that makes you produce green light feelings. You go, well, that's wonderful. Isn't that? I always knew that. Of course, I always knew that I shouldn't lie. That's fantastic. You feel great. You sit in a meditation, you focus on being truthful, not lying, speaking and your internal voice being the truthful. You close the book, you put it back on the rack, you walk out of the reference library and you start lying. That's what you're doing. If you read it and you know it's the truth, then live your truth. Stop lying. Stop saying these things unless, I say to my clients, when we have an hour or an hour and a half session and they record the session, I send them the recording. I say, now go through this with a pen and paper and tell me if you've said something that you believe to be the truth, like I'm not good enough, I just use that one. I'm just using that one for a client yesterday. Give me the evidence. And she said, well, there's no evidence. And I said, so you're telling me that you believe you're not good enough and there's no evidence? And she says, yeah, well, I just believe it. But this is the inner child. You've given up on the inner child. It's like you say, well, have another chocolate biscuit. Yeah. Have another chocolate. Oh, shut you up. Oh, have another chocolate biscuit. I don't know why I'm giving you the chocolate biscuit. And then I come along and say, why do you keep giving your physical child chocolate biscuit? And you go, I don't know. Okay. It doesn't make sense. And this is what you've got to make it make sense. You've got to, you know all this. As I'm sitting here and looking at you, you know it already. And don't say I didn't know it or I don't know, because that's just a get out. You've always known it because you're a spiritual being. You are a spiritual being on this human journey. Connect to that knowledge, that inner knowledge. Build your life on that solid rock, and then it can't be blown away. Because if you build your life, seems crazy to me. This is nonsensical. You create the emotions, and then you spend your life trying to protect yourself from the emotions that you've created. It's like you invent a monster and then you lock yourself in because the monster's going to attack you. Don't invent the monster. Stop creating the feelings. Go and find and sort out what it is you need to learn as quickly as you can, and then feelings change. I can tell you, you listen to me, you can laugh, cry, disagree with me. Feelings come and go. They are not permanent unless you put them on the carousel of despair.
And I guess, David, what you're saying here is we are making a choice, because if we are faced with a difficult situation, a challenging situation, an uncertain situation, and our inner child is giving us lots of squealing piglets, lots of painful, uncomfortable red light emotions, we have a choice then that we can follow the truth, the reality, the wisdom that the Shen gives us, or we can dismiss that quickly and we can just buy into the lies that the inner child has given us. And follow an 8-year-old. And we're making a choice, because that inner wisdom, if we ever sit quietly in a difficult situation, I guess our message is that inner wisdom, that answer, if you ask the question, the answer will come from your Shen. But the problem is the answer is spoken quiet and softly, and the inner child's voice, the inner child's rages, the inner child's fears and red light emotions can almost drown out the voice of the Shen.
I've just thought about what client said to me a couple of days ago. When she was getting this, she says, you know what my inner child is like? She said, have you ever had children in the back seat of a car and they're kicking the back of the seat? She said, that's what my inner child is like. It's kicking, screaming, I don't want to go, pull over, I want to go to the toilet, I want to stop, I want an ice cream. She said, all the time, my inner child's kicking the back of the seat, because I've always let it and I've always given into it. And I thought that was a great analogy of the inner child.
It is. And if you to follow that analogy, it's almost like you've got your spiritual sat-nav saying you need to turn right at the next turning, but you can't hear what it's saying because the child is making such a row in the back seat. And that's life. So we've talked about how to connect to Shen, how to listen to Shen, basically what not to do to pull yourself away from Shen.
Refocusing. Yeah. Refocus on Shen.
We've talked about putting in place boundaries with the inner child, compassionately self-disciplining the child, speaking truthfully to the child, and also consistency. So not saying one thing and doing another, or not having a day when you discipline your inner child with love and care, but then the next day you let it run riot again, because this consistency is important. And we've talked about this on our inner child reparenting video, so I'll put a link to that because it's so much more detailed than what we're giving you now.
That's a very important point. Consistency is a Taoist teaching. It doesn't work. It even goes worse when you do it one day and don't do it the other way, because the inner child gets confused.
And also it doesn't believe you because it thinks you're all over the place, so why would it want to trust you?
And it believes if it shouts loud enough, guess what's going to happen? You're going to give in and it will win. So what does it do? Shout even louder. And every time you give in, you're giving it red meat and it gets louder.
And so then the final part of the reparenting is the adult part of our mind must just teach the inner child the life lesson to be learned, the life lesson it's stuck on, because although we can compassionately self-discipline the child, although we can say, stop it, etc., although we can say to ourselves one day, well, the truth here is that we live in a world of flux, but we are going to be able to cope. Until we communicate that message, that wisdom that the adult part of us is gained from Shen, until we then communicate that with the inner child will forever be stuck on that life lesson. And so I guess it's our role, the adult, mature part of our mind, as to act as that intermediary, to interpret and sit with the child on a daily basis, on a regular basis, and keep going over the life lesson with the child until the child trusts you, understands you, and buys into the truth of what you're telling it.
Yes, because energetically what's happening and what creates the red lights, whatever you call them, anxiety, panic, depression, whatever you want to call them, you created an energetic and a spiritual separation. There's a part of your mind wants to go that way, and there's a part of your mind wants to go that way. And that's like a seesaw. You're going up and down, and that creates the red light feelings. And so the life lesson, always about the inner child, will always be basically the same life lesson. Will always be the same life lesson, is oneness. Because what we're trying to do is not sabotage the inner child. We're not trying to kill the inner child. We're not trying to cut it off. We're not trying to ignore it. We're not trying to put it in a box, in a sweep it under the carpet. I hear all of these things that my clients said. Sweep it under the carpet, forget about it, lock it away in the door. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to bring it into a oneness. And as Alex said at the top of the video, that is the authentic self, the oneness, where you, your inner child, your Shen are all working together. Here's another analogy. It's like bringing a team of horses so they're all pulling in the same direction. You haven't got one horse pulling there, one horse pulling there, we're all going in the same direction. And we're going, and that's what the Chinese call yi, intention, the path. And the path is windy. Here I go with another river analogy, just like a river. Truth, honesty, and integrity. Thirdly, self-responsibility. And there's the three clauses of the spiritual contract. If you stick to those three clauses, clear intention, what you want from your life. Truth, honesty, and integrity. What you say, what you think, what goes through your self-talk is the truth. Self-responsibility. You are not a victim. You create your emotions. Every emotion. Red light emotion and green light emotion. Happiness, joy, confidence, love. You create it. No one else. So take responsibility now. And above all, I know you can do this because I believe in you. And that's why I say you've got to stop doing all these things that throw you out of balance. And you've got to start listening to that inner wisdom that you've got. No one can give it to you. You've already got it. And you've got to just learn to move away from that loud, wailing voice and listen to that quieter inner knowledge and inner wisdom.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Well, we've covered an awful lot of ground there, but I hope that has given you some insight as to what's going on when you experience that inner turmoil, tension and seeming conflict with part of you. I hope we've given you a practical way forward and lots of tips that you can work on. I will put links in the video description below to lots more videos that will help you with this topic. If any of you would like to work one-to-one with David on any of the issues we talked about today, David works by video call with clients all over the world, and I will put more information on David's sessions in the description below. And finally, if you're not already a subscriber to our channel, please do subscribe. We produce new videos every week and we look forward to sharing with them. We'll see you very soon. Goodbye.